quiet year of 1892, the people of Black Hollow spoke in hushed voices about one name and one name only. The widow, her presence seemed to drain the warmth from the air, and her shadow stretched further than the sun could reach the townsfolk. Swore that she did not simply live among them, she seeped into their lives like a slow poison, turning comfort into unease and bread into bitterness. They watched her glide through the narrow streets wrapped in mourning black, her veil hiding the expression on her face. Some said it was grief, some said it was hatred. Others whispered it was something darker, the kind of darkness that clung to a soul and would not let go. But was she a grieving widow, broken by loss, or a calculating woman bent on revenge? No one knew yet. All of Black Hollow would soon learn the cost of her secrets. Black Hollow was a small and secluded town tucked deep within the shadowy valleys of New England, where the fog rolled low across the fields, and the trees grew so tall that they seemed to swallow the sky whole. The people who lived there were simple, folk bound by tradition and by the land they had tilled for generations, and they were wary of strangers. For strangers rarely came, and when they did, they seldom stayed long. The town was wrapped in silence, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels or the distant toll of the church bell. On Sunday mornings, few outsiders had reason to visit, for the roads into Black Hollow twisted like serpents through the hills, and many said the place felt cursed, as though time itself had forgotten it. When someone new did arrive, the townsfolk always gathered in the square to watch, curious and suspicious in equal measure. And so it was in the autumn of 1892, when a lone figure appeared on the dirt road leading into town. Her name was Eleanor Gray, though few dared speak it at first, and she was a widow dressed entirely in black, from her heavy mourning gown to the veil that covered her face. She carried herself with a strange and unsettling grace, her posture unbroken, her footsteps measured like the ticking of a clock, her eyes hidden but her presence undeniable. She had come after the mysterious death of her husband, a man no one in Black Hollow had ever met, and yet the weight of his passing seemed to follow her like a shadow from the moment she stepped onto the main street. The air itself seemed to grow heavier and thicker, as though the valley recognized her and recoiled. The townsfolk whispered behind their hands as she passed. Some claimed the air turned colder when she walked by. Others swore that animals grew restless in her presence. Dogs barked, horses shied, and even the crows fell silent whenever she lingered. The innkeeper offered her no welcome, for she did not seek it. Instead, she climbed the hill to the edge of the town, where an old and crumbling estate sat abandoned, a house with shutters that banged in the wind and weeds that grew taller than the fence line. No one had lived there in years, but Eleanor Gray moved in as though she belonged, and from that moment, Black Hollow was never the same. The children dared each other to run past her gate at dusk, and their laughter would die in their throats. The older folk muttered that the widow carried death in her wake, and the pastor warned from the pulpit that sorrow can twist a heart until it no longer remembers God. Yet none dared approach her. None dared ask who she was or why she had chosen their forgotten valley for her home. The widow never smiled. She never wept. She only watched and walked and waited. And though no crime had been committed, though no proof of wickedness was ever found, the people of Black Hollow began to feel as though a storm had settled over them, one that would not pass. As the weeks turned to months and the leaves fell from the trees, the widow remained in her house, her black dresses drifting through the windows like moving shadows. Candles burned at strange hours, sometimes all night long, their glow pulsing like a heartbeat in the distance when the wind carried it. Right, one could swear there was singing faint and low drifting from her estate words. No one understood, but which sent chills crawling across the skin. And then there was the garden at the back of her house, a patch of earth where nothing good had grown for years, but which suddenly sprang alive under her hand. Though it was not wheat or apples or flowers that she cultivated, it was herbs, twisted plants with names that made the farmers cross themselves: nightshade, wolf's bane, belladonna, aconite. Her garden grew wild and thick until its smell carried on the breeze, bitter and sharp and suffocating. The people began to wonder what she did with these plants. They wondered what powders she ground at her table when the candles burned long after. Midnight they wondered why the well near her house tasted strange whenever the wind blew from the north. Yet none confronted her. None dared. For when she walked through the town to the small market to buy bread or salt, the crowd parted without a word. No one wished to meet her eyes. No one wished to speak her name. The widow belonged to Black Hollow now. But Black Hollow no longer belonged to itself. The weight of her presence pressed down on every street, every home, every breath. And though the town had always been quiet now, it was silent in a way that felt wrong. It was the silence of dread, of waiting for something that none could name. And though her husband had died far away under circumstances never explained, the people began to whisper that his death had followed her, that it had seeped into her black gown and clung to her every step, and that sooner or later that death would spread to them all. She moved into a crumbling estate on the edge of the woods, a place that had stood in silence for more years than anyone cared to remember. Its roof sagged, its shutters hung crooked, and its chimneys leaned like tired old men. Yet somehow, when the widow Eleanor Gray stepped across its threshold, the house seemed to awaken, not with warmth or light, but with a breath that felt cold and heavy, as if the very stones had been waiting for her. The people of Black Hollow spoke of the estate with a kind of fearful reverence. They said the land itself was cursed. They said no grass grew near its gate, and no birds nested in the trees that bordered its crooked fence in the daylight. The house looked abandoned, yet alive. A husk with eyes that watched from the cracked windows. At night, it was worse. Lanterns in its windows flickered even when unlit villagers who dared glance at the hill after sundown swore they saw a glow like dying embers pulsing in the darkness, as if the house itself was breathing. Some claimed the light was a trick of the moon, but others insisted it was the widow herself walking from room to room with her veil still drawn. Even though there was no one to see her, her presence inside that house turned it into something else, something that did not belong to the town nor to the world of the living. Children dared not walk past it at night. They told stories in whispers around the schoolhouse about the woman in black who drifted through the windows without opening them, about the sound of a rocking chair creaking in the attic even when no wind blew. The bravest of them would challenge each other to run to the fence and touch its rusted iron gate before the sun dipped below the trees. Yet when they reached it, their laughter would falter. Their breath would turn shallow and their courage would vanish. More than one child returned home, pale and trembling, swearing they had heard someone call their name from the shadows beyond the gate. The elders remembered when the house had belonged to the Stanton family, a line that had once been wealthy and proud until misfortune hollowed them out. One by one, the last heir had vanished without trace, leaving the estate to rot for decades after that. No one claimed it. No one wanted it when the widow took it as her own. Some wondered how she could live there alone in such ruin, yet others whispered that the house was not a ruin at all, not anymore. They said it had chosen her just as much as she had chosen it. Farmers passing by on their way to the fields muttered that the ground near the estate felt wrong. The soil was pale and dry even after rain. The grass grew thin and yellow, and no wildflowers bloomed along the fence line. Animals balked when led near the property. Cows kicked against their ropes. Horses refused to cross the shadow of the gate. Even the dogs of Black Hollow would whine and pull at their chains if their masters tried to drag them closer. The widow did not mind. She never asked for company. She never opened her doors to neighbors. Instead, she let the estate breathe around her, and it seemed to the townsfolk that the house grew darker with her inside. Its windows became deeper, like eyes sinking into a skull. Its timbers groaned not with age but with restless dreams. And each night the glow of Its phantom lanterns pulsed brighter against the black trees of the hollow. The people of the town avoided the road that ran past the estate, even in daylight. They chose longer paths to the fields rather than walk within sight of the hill, and at night, they barred their shutters and locked their doors with trembling hands, for the woods whispered, and the house glowed, and the widow watched from her crumbling estate. A figure in black who seemed less like a woman and more like a shadow given flesh. Weeks later, the first shadow of dread settled over Black Hollow when the town baker fell ill. His name was Samuel Pritchard, a man known for his wide smile, his gentle hands, and his skill with dough. He was the kind of soul who made the mornings of Black Hollow bearable, for his bread was more than food. It was comfort. It was tradition. It was the smell that drifted down the crooked streets and told the people of the valley that the day had begun. His loaves were soft and golden, his sweet rolls light and warm, his pies rich with apples gathered from the orchards that clung to the hillsides. Children would linger outside his shop to catch the scent of sugar and cinnamon in the air, and travelers passing through always left with baskets full of his craft. But one evening whispers spread that something was wrong with Samuel Pritchard. He had baked as always, his ovens glowing, his shelves filled, yet those who ate his bread spoke of a strange taste, a bitterness that clung to the tongue, a flavor sharp and metallic as if iron had seeped into the flour. At first they thought it a mistake, perhaps spoiled grain or water from a bad barrel. But when the baker himself sat to share a slice with his wife, he pushed his plate away, his face pale and his hand trembling. Within hours, his body betrayed him. Sweat poured from his skin. His lips turned ashen, and his breath came ragged and shallow. By dawn, he was gone. The doctor called it poison. In the blood, he examined the body with grim eyes and declared that some foul substance had crept into his veins. What kind of substance he could not say. No snakebite, no fever, no ailment known to the valley resembled this death. The townsfolk gathered outside the bakery, whispering to one another, their voices sharp with fear and suspicion. How could such a good man die so quickly? How could bread, the very food that had nourished them, become the instrument of death? Rumors took root faster than weeds. Some said the flour had been tainted during transport. Others whispered of the widow on the hill. Her shadow had lengthened across the town since her arrival, and now the first death had come. The connection seemed too cruelly perfect to ignore. The baker had always greeted her with courtesy, though never warmth. He had wrapped her bread with trembling hands and passed it across the counter without looking her in the eye. Some claimed they saw her lips curl into a smile as she left his shop only days before his death. The widow did not come to the funeral. She did not kneel at the grave or offer words of comfort. Instead, her windows glowed that night with the light of a dozen candles, and the flicker of her shadows moved across the walls as though she were pacing from room to room. Those who dared to watch swore that faintly they heard the sound of laughter carried on the wind, though whether it was laughter or weeping none could say. Fear thickened in Black Hollow with every passing hour. The people who had eaten Samuel Pritchard's bread that day stared at their plates with growing horror. Had they too swallowed death? Would the same poison creep into their blood while they slept? They prayed. Fervently they watched their children for signs of sickness. They searched their own bodies for any tremor or weakness. But by some cruel twist, only the baker himself had been taken. His shop remained closed. The smell of yeast and sugar vanished from the streets, and in its place came the heavy silence of dread bread. The symbol of life had become a memory of death. And though no proof was spoken aloud, many eyes turned to the hill where the crumbling estate stood, its lanterns flickering. Without flame, its mistress a figure in black, unmoved by the grief that had begun to claim Black Hollow. Another followed it, began quietly, as though death itself wished to slip unnoticed into the town. Yet Black Hollow was too small, too watchful, for such things to go unseen. The school teacher, Miss Catherine Hale, was the next. Her voice had been the steady guide of children for more than 20 years. Her chalk had shaped the letters of the alphabet. Her hand had drawn maps of the world on the cracked blackboard, and her gentle patience had carried generations of young ones from ignorance to understanding. She was stern, but fair beloved, and feared in equal measure. She was the kind of figure a town could not imagine losing. And yet, lose her they did. It was a winter morning when she collapsed in the schoolhouse, her lips pale, her breath shuddering. The children screamed as she fell across her desk, her teacup still half full on its edge. The cup rattled to the floor, spilling, a dark liquid that smelled faintly wrong, bitter, in a way none could place a taste of iron and stone. The doctor came quickly, but not quickly enough, for within hours her life had drained away as swiftly as the baker before her, and the town stood outside the schoolhouse in silent clusters, their eyes wide, their whispers thin and frightened. The stable boy came next, a young man barely grown, with laughter still bright in his throat and dreams still unformed. He tended the horses of Black Hollow. With a kind of easy devotion, his hands always smelled of hay and leather, his shirt always streaked with dust. Yet he was known for his cheer, his quick smile, his habit of singing while he worked. But his song was silenced one evening after he shared a meal of stew with a fellow worker. He had complained of a strange taste, sharp and metallic, that clung to the back of his tongue. He thought little of it until his stomach turned. His skin burned and his strength failed him. By morning he was gone. The pattern could no longer be denied. First the baker, then the teacher, then the stable boy, each taken by food or drink, each death following the same grim rhythm, a taste that should not have been there, bitterness, sharpness, metal, and then collapse, fever, shivering, death. The people of Black Hollow had no word for it other than curse, and soon the name of the widow slipped from every mouth, carried in tones of fear and certainty. The widow has cursed us. They whispered, she has poisoned our bread, she has soured our water, she has stained the very air we breathe. Families began to eat less. They tested every bite before daring to swallow. They sniffed their water as though it carried secrets. They watched one another for signs of pallor or weakness. Children asked their mothers why the widow wished them harm, and mothers could not answer. Fathers spoke in low tones near the fire about the woman on the hill, about the herbs in her garden, about the lanterns that flickered in windows that held no flame. Some claimed they had seen her walking at night, her black figure drifting through the woods, her hands carrying jars that glimmered like glass filled with stars. Others said she was not seen at all, that she moved only in shadow, invisible. But present, each story added to the fear. Each rumor became a stone in the wall of suspicion, and yet no one confronted her. No one dared step through her gate. No one asked the questions that clawed at their throats, for to speak to her was to invite her gaze, and to be seen by her was to risk the curse passing into your own veins. And so the people remained silent outwardly, but inwardly they trembled with every meal, with every sip, with every breath, as though each act of living might be their last. Behind her house stretched a garden unlike any other in Black Hollow, a patch of earth that seemed both alive and unnatural, sprouting plants that no farmer dared to sow and no healer dared to use. The widow Eleanor Gray tended it with her veiled head bent and her hands gloved in black, as though the very soil carried secrets that ordinary flesh could not endure. The people of Black Hollow spoke of this garden in whispers, for it was not a place of corn or apples or pumpkins, but a tangle of nightshade with its glossy black berries shining like drops of midnight, a hedge of wolfsbane with purple flowers curling like tongues of flame, and rows of herbs, whose names alone made strong men cross themselves: belladonna, aconite, henbane, roots pale and twisted, leaves bitter and sharp. No one had ever seen such things thrive in the rocky soil of the valley, and yet under her care they grew tall and thick, their perfume heavy and sickly, drifting down the hill on nights when the wind was cruel. Some swore that even the insects avoided the place bees would not land. Butterflies did not pass near, and the birds overhead flew wide arcs to avoid its shadow. It was a garden that defied nature, and because of that, it became the heart of every rumor that Black Hollow carried. By day, the widow was sometimes seen crouched among her plants, moving with slow patience, her veil pinned back. Though no one was close enough to see her face, the curve of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, they said it was as if she listened to the herbs, as if she leaned in to hear them whisper secrets that only she could understand. She would pluck a leaf, pinch a berry, cut a stem, and carry her harvest into the crumbling house where the windows glowed faintly, even in the brightest daylight. By night it was worse. The townsfolk who lived closest claimed that when the moon was full, a faint grinding sound rose from her kitchen, the steady turn of a mortar and pestle stones scraping against each other as powders were made from leaves and roots. Those who listened longer said the sound was not alone, that her voice joined it, low and humming words spoken in no tongue. They knew. Some said it was Latin. Some said it was older than Latin, a language of earth and shadow and death. Her chant rose and fell with the rhythm of her grinding, sometimes soft like a lullaby, sometimes sharp like a blade across stone, and always carrying a pull that made the hair on the neck rise. A farmer once swore he saw her through the trees at midnight, carrying a lantern that did not burn with fire, but with a pale blue glow. She walked barefoot across the frost, her hands clutching a small jar that shimmered as though it contained dust of stars. He claimed she stopped at the garden, poured the contents across the roots, and then spoke words that bent the air around her. He did not stay to hear more, for terror drove him stumbling back to his home, but he never returned to the field that bordered her land again. Some believed she was making poisons, others believed she was crafting charms, still others whispered that she was speaking with the dead, her husband perhaps, or spirits far older than memory. Whatever the truth, none dared step closer to learn, for it was said that those who watched too long from the edge of the trees would wake the next morning with fevers that burned without cure. As if her gaze reached even through the night, the widow's garden became the heart of Black Hollow's fear, a place that seemed to breathe with her, a place where no farmer would dare touch the soil, a place where the ground itself seemed to sigh when the wind blew through the tangled herbs. And always the question gnawed at the people. What did she grind in her bowls? What did she whisper in the hours when the town slept? And most of all, what waited in those jars that glowed like captured stars? No one confronted her openly, for fear clamped down upon the hearts of Black Hollow like an iron grip. Every family knew the stories. Every table carried the dread. And yet no one dared to march up the hill and face the widow in her crumbling estate. Instead, they turned inward. They watched their food, their water, their neighbors, and even themselves with suspicion. The meals that had once been the anchor of their days became moments of terror. Bread was no longer broken with joy or shared in laughter. Each loaf was torn apart, carefully examined for the faintest trace of bitterness before a child dared take a bite. Some families kept their children from eating at all until the parents had tasted first, as if a mother or father would offer up their body as a shield to whatever curse might cling to the food. The baker was gone, and no new bread was made. The sweet smell that had once drifted through the streets was replaced with the sour air of fear and silence. The wells of Black Hollow grew still and unused, for whispers spread that the water itself was tainted, that the widow had poisoned the veins of the earth. The people carried buckets far into the woods to draw from springs they trusted. But even then, they sniffed and sipped. With suspicion, sometimes the water seemed pure and cool, yet it carried with it the unease of not knowing if death swam unseen in its depths. Paranoia settled over the valley like a fog. Neighbors no longer gathered to share supper, doors closed earlier, windows shuttered tighter. Laughter grew scarce and conversations became whispers. Every cough, every tremor, every complaint of a sour taste was seized upon as a sign that the curse had claimed another. The doctor moved from house to house, his face lined with exhaustion, but he had no answers. He could not name the sickness. He could not trace its source. And in his silence, the people found only more reason to believe the widow was behind it all. Children were told not to stray from home, not to accept food, not to wander past the schoolyard, yet children are curious, and curiosity in Black Hollow was as dangerous as hunger. Some dared to peek toward the hill. Others whispered dares about drinking from the abandoned well near the widow's land. But the bravest came back pale with eyes wide, swearing they heard voices in the water, swearing they saw the shadow of a woman moving between the trees. The town that had once been bound together by routine, by church bells and shared harvests, began to unravel. Suspicion gnawed at its roots. Families turned inward. Friendships cracked beneath the weight of fear, and the streets at dusk grew empty, save for the crows that circled overhead. Black Hollow became a place of hunger and paranoia, a place where every bite might be a death sentence, where every drink might carry a curse, and where the widow's shadow grew longer with every passing day. One autumn night, when the air grew sharp with the scent of falling leaves and the sky hung heavy with clouds, the people of Black Hollow awoke to find something strange and terrible waiting at their doors. Each household discovered a folded sheet of thick parchment tucked neatly under the threshold or pressed into the crack of a shutter. Upon it was written in a hand both elegant and unsettling, the strokes long and curling like vines across stone. The message was brief but heavy with meaning, an invitation to dine at the estate of the widow Eleanor Gray. No one in Black Hollow had ever been invited up that hill. Not once since she had arrived. The widow kept to herself, her veil, her herbs, her flickering windows. Yet now she reached out to them, her words promising a grand meal, a night of warmth and company at her table. She signed only with her name, Eleanor Gray, but the people read more in the letters than was written. The ink seemed darker than ordinary ink, as though it had been mixed with blood or shadow. The paper carried a faint perfume, not of flowers, but of bitter herbs, a scent that lingered on the fingers long after the parchment was touched. The town reacted with unease. Some men crumpled the notes at once and cast them into their hearths, watching the paper curl and blacken in the flames as though burning. It could break the spell. Others folded the invitation again and tucked it away in drawers, too fearful to look upon it, yet too fearful to destroy it. Still others kept the letters close, reading them over and over as though drawn to the promise, within despite themselves. And then there were those who felt the pull stronger than fear, a strange tug in their hearts that made them wonder what the meal would be, what secrets might be revealed behind the crumbling walls of the widow's house. They spoke little of it aloud, but their eyes betrayed them. They lingered at the foot of the hill at dusk, staring upward toward the estate, as though listening for a voice that called only to them. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the handwriting shifted when left in the dark, letters curling into shapes that were not words at all, but symbols of some forgotten tongue. Others said the letters whispered when held close, as if the paper itself breathed with the widow's voice, soft and low. Like the turning of earth, a few swore that the ink shimmered faintly in candlelight like wetness that never dried. The invitations divided the town into those who refused and those who wondered. Some mothers pressed their children, close warning them never to look upon the hill again. Some fathers sharpened knives and muttered that if any man went to dine with the widow, he would not return. Still, others lowered their voices and admitted to feeling hunger more than the ordinary kind. A hunger that gnawed not at the belly but at the soul. A hunger that told them they must go. They must see. They must taste whatever the widow placed before them. That night shutters were barred tighter than ever before. Fires burned low and watchful eyes peered, into the darkness, but the hill above glowed brighter than the rest of the town, its windows lit with a steady flame, not flickering, not wavering, as though the estate itself waited for its guests, and from within the trees faint music drifted thin and strange, not played on fiddle or harp, but on something older, a sound like wind drawn through hollow bones. The letters had been delivered and the choice lay with the people. Yet in Black Hollow choices were not always one's own, and as the days passed it became clear that some would accept the widow's invitation, whether by will or by a force that reached into their very marrow. Those who went never returned. Their names became whispers, spoken only behind locked doors for the families. Left behind received no word, no knock at the door, no footsteps returning from the hill. It was as though the guests had been swallowed whole by the estate itself, taken into the belly of the crumbling house where the widow waited with her table laid and her candles burning. The morning after their departure, the windows of the widow's home glowed not faintly as they had before, but with a furious brightness, as though dozens of candles blazed behind the broken panes, their light spilling across the mist and painting the trees with fire. It was not the warm, golden glow of hearth fires, but a harsher, flickering radiance, white and sharp, that stabbed through the fog and made the valley below uneasy. And from that house came sound first, the soft hum of voices, then rising into laughter, the kind of laughter that might belong at a feast, but carried across the hollow. It felt wrong, too sharp, too hollow, too full of something that was not joy. Some said it was the laughter of the missing, townsfolk ringing out in strange harmony as if they had become players in some cruel game. Others swore it was only the widow herself laughing alone, her voice splitting into many, echoing across the walls of her estate until it seemed a whole crowd of unseen guests joined her. The people of Black Hollow did not climb the hill to see. They barred their doors tighter and pressed their ears to their shutters, listening to the sound that rolled down from the estate hour after hour. The laughter did not stop. It grew louder through the day until it seemed to bleed into every street, into every corner of the valley. A constant reminder that something was happening on the hill, something that no one wished to name. But as the sun began to sink and the shadows lengthened, the laughter changed slowly, almost imperceptibly. It faltered. It cracked. It broke into jagged edges. What had been mirth became shrieks. What had been voices became wails. At first faint, carried on the wind, then clearer, sharper, until every man, woman, and child in Black Hollow could hear it. The sound of screams bursting from the house on the hill. They were not the screams of one or two, but of many, a chorus of agony that rose like smoke into the darkening sky, piercing the silence of the valley until even the crows abandoned their roosts and fled the trees. The people covered their ears, but still the sound filled their bones. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers stood frozen, unable to act. The pastor fell to his knees and prayed aloud, his voice trembling. Yet he could not pray loud enough to drown the cries. The screams went on until night had swallowed the hollow, and then just as suddenly as they began, they ceased. Silence fell heavier than before. No laughter, no wails, no voices. Only the hollow sound of the wind against the shutters and the distant groan of the trees bending in the dark all night. The windows of the estate still glowed with that unnatural light, yet no one dared approach. No one dared speak above a whisper. It was as if the hill itself had become forbidden ground, as if to even look upon it too long would invite the fate of those who had gone and never returned. Finally, when the fear that strangled Black Hollow grew too heavy to bear, the sheriff gathered a group of men, lanterns and rifles clutched tight in their hands, and they climbed the crooked path toward the widow's estate. The night pressed in around them, thick and cold, and the forest seemed to lean closer with every step, branches scraping the air like fingers warning them back. Yet none turned away. The whispers of their wives, the stares of their children, the weight of the missing townsfolk pushed them onward up the hill toward the house that breathed with its own strange life. The estate loomed before them, its shutters sagging, its walls scarred by age and ivy. Yet the windows still glowed steady and bright, the light spilling out as if welcoming them, mocking them. Perhaps the men hesitated at the gate, for no grass grew there, the earth hard and black as though scorched. But the sheriff spat into the dirt and ordered them forward. The door groaned open, not from their hands, but as if it had been waiting, the hinges shrieking like some beast disturbed from sleep. Inside, the air was heavy with the stench of herbs and smoke, and something sweeter that made their stomachs turn a scent like rotting fruit beneath the clamor of their boots. The floorboards creaked as though echoing the weight of unseen footsteps leading them deeper into the house, until at last they stood before the dining hall. There the table stretched long and grand, as if for a royal banquet. Silver gleamed. In the lantern-light plates of food lay untouched fruits, shriveled meats glistening. Yet none of it seemed to rot, though it should have by now. The sheriff stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at the strange perfection of it all. The men shifted uneasily. Some swore the bread seemed to breathe, rising and falling as though it too had lungs. Others swore the apples pulsed faintly like hearts beating in silence. But the strangest thing was the chairs. 12 of them carved with care, each pulled back, as though guests had only just risen from them. Yet every chair was empty, every place untouched except for one at the head of the table where a single goblet lay tipped onto its side. A pool of dark red liquid spilled across the tablecloth, dripping slowly to the floor, with each drop echoing louder than it should in the silence. The men froze, watching that spreading stain. Some whispered it was wine, but the smell that rose from it was wrong. Thick, metallic, sharp. The sheriff bent close the lantern, shaking faintly in his grip, and the liquid caught the light. Not crimson like claret, but deeper, darker, the color of blood. The sheriff drew back, his face pale, but he said nothing. Not yet. The air in the room shifted, then colder, sharper, as though the house itself knew it had been breached, and the men swore they heard something faint just beyond the walls, the sound of breathing, many voices breathing in unison, waiting. The widow was gone. There was no torn fabric left behind, no footsteps. In the dust, no sign that a living soul had ever walked the halls of that rotting estate. Her room upstairs lay bare, the bed untouched, the mirror cracked as though something within had broken free and escaped. The men searched until their lantern oil burned low, their voices echoing against stone and wood. But they found nothing, no body, no shadow, not even the faintest trace of a woman who had once haunted their every breath. Some say she fled that night, vanishing into the endless woods with her poisons and powders, her black veil trailing behind her like smoke, carried off into valleys where no man dared wander. They imagine her alive, still in some distant place, her presence settling over another unsuspecting town, her touch turning bread bitter and water foul, her laughter drifting through another village, waiting for new souls to fall under her curse. Yet others swear she never left, that the widow's spirit was bound too tightly to Black Hollow to ever abandon it. They say she dissolved into the very bones of the town, that the bricks of the houses breathe her poison, and the soil beneath the cobblestones drinks her hunger. When the autumn winds rise through the valley, some hear her voice humming low, a song too faint to follow but too chilling to forget. What is certain is that Black Hollow did not survive the people who had once filled its streets. One by one drifted away, leaving homes shuttered and barns rotting. The air grew heavier with each passing season, until the town itself seemed to surrender to silence. By the turn of the century, not a soul remained. Roofs caved in, doors sagged, and the church bell rusted in its tower. The hollow stood empty, waiting as though it still listened for footsteps that never came. Yet travelers speak of it even now. They say the woods hide the ruins of Black Hollow, its paths overgrown, its houses slumped like weary corpses, But in the center of the forgotten square, the well still stands, its stones slick with moss, its water dark as night. Locals warn never to drink from it for the widow. They whisper still lingers there, her poison flowing through the veins of the earth itself. And so the story endures, passed from lips to ears, wherever firelight flickers in the dark. If you drink from the well of Black Hollow, the widow will claim you too. They say her shadow will crawl inside your chest. Her laughter will echo in your skull, and your breath will grow heavy, until you too belong to the silence of the hollow.